Thank you all for coming. I want to start tonight by asking you a question. What is the truth? Like, if you want to know the facts, do you search on Google? Or do you go on Wikipedia? Maybe now ChatGPT? Or is the government the source of truth? Or science? The scientific method, peer review, right? That always works. Unless, of course, the science gets politicized by governments or large corporations. Well, so what is the truth? It really depends on what you trust. And I don't know about you, but I don't know what I trust right now. And that's why the crypto space has been working for a very long time on building Web3. And Web3 is a new platform for decentralized applications. And it allows us to build new internet-native institutions that we can trust. And we can trust them because they're decentralized, right? They're not controlled by anyone. And they provide verifiable information. So how does it work? It starts with cryptography. With public key cryptography, everybody has a private key and a public key. The private key you have to keep secret, and if you've created like a crypto wallet, that's what you're generating is one of these key pairs. And modern devices have a dedicated place in their chips, like the iPhone, to store these private keys. And then your public key is your public address that people can use to interact with you. And so if you want to send a message in a verifiable way, you can sign that message, and people, any recipient can verify that you're the one that sent that message. And today we have things like generative AIs that can generate deepfakes, photos and videos, where we can't even tell what we're seeing anymore and whether it's true. And so this kind of cryptographically signed data might actually be the closest thing that we have to truth and to facts going forward. Then you need storage networks. So we have these decentralized storage networks like Arweave, IPFS, and Filecoin, and they let you store files in a decentralized way on a decentralized network of these storage providers that will store that data or those files for you. They have economic incentives to store that. And what's special about the way that we use these in Web3 is that we use content address storage. So if you put a file or some data on something like Google Drive or Dropbox, you get a link, and that link points to Google's servers. And that Google can choose to send you back whatever file they want, and you don't really know if what they're giving you back is correct. So with content address storage, you have essentially a hash. It's a string of letters and numbers that uniquely identifies that file. And so if you ask for it, you can verify that the file that you got back is correct. And it also allows you to get that file or that data from any peers that you want. So these storage networks are a really important component. Then we have blockchains. And blockchains allow you to have essentially a distributed database that nobody controls, but that everyone can agree on the state of the database at any point in time. And so when we were talking about a cryptographically signed message, if I say that I'm in San Francisco and I sign that, it's not necessarily a fact that I'm in San Francisco, but it is a fact that I said that I was in San Francisco. And if you anchor that message on chain, now it's also a fact that I said that at a specific point in time. And so now you get time, and you can have global consensus on the state of a database without any companies, any participants having control over the system. Over the last few years, the crypto industry has been working on scaling these blockchains so that we can process many more transactions much faster and much cheaper. And we do that using like layer 2s, which is basically a way of like stacking blockchains on top of each other so you can have many more of these chains that kind of anchor their security, as well as with app-specific chains where applications can have their own chains, and it really depends on the security properties that you want, but all of this is ways that the crypto space has successfully scaled blockchains. And then you need indexing, and this is where the graph comes in. So when we're producing all of this data that's being stored on all of these different storage networks and with all of these different blockchains and layer 2s, you need a way to process and organize that data so that you can efficiently serve it to applications. And so the graph is a decentralized network that processes all of this data. Developers or anyone can build what's called a subgraph, which is an API that's organizing some subset of the graph. And that runs on this decentralized network of nodes that then anybody can query. And the data that comes back is all verifiable. And so we have the infrastructure now. Right? We have all of these infrastructure protocols. And so we can now build a global graph of all of the world's public knowledge and information organized and served in a decentralized way. But where is it? We should have Web3 by now. Are you guys using it? I'm still looking for it. And we are just missing one more piece. So we describe Geo as a Web3 browser and a decentralized knowledge graph app. And I announced Geo at Graph Day 9 months ago in June, and I previewed an early version of the browser. And we gave it out to 50 people to test, and we learned a lot. One of the things that we learned is that we really needed to start this with a web-based version. And so we've been working on that for the last 9 months. And we call it Geo Genesis. So it's a decentralized knowledge graph app. And you can access it from any web browser. And that's what I'm going to be showing you today. If you go to geobrowser.io, this is what you see. And you can click this Launch Geo Genesis button. And what you see is a bunch of top-level spaces. So each space has its own subset of the knowledge graph. It has its own knowledge graph that communities can organize for themselves. And each community can define its own governance process that it wants to use, how it wants to admit its members, whatever kind of rules that it wants. And they can organize and get to consensus on the state of their knowledge graph. So a knowledge graph is the most flexible way of representing information. So you have entities, and anything, any concept is like an entity. The entities have attributes. So like my name is, and then a value. So my name is Yaniv. And these entities can relate to any other entities however they want, and that forms a graph. So, for example, we can hop into the philosophy space, and this is a place to organize all information related to philosophy. So we've been having a series of meetups called the Future Thinkers Collective, where people that want to think deeply about how we structure a society and how we want to build this new decentralized system can talk about these deep questions. And we're organizing some topics here. And for example, we can take a look at a topic like privacy versus transparency. So everybody has a basic human right to privacy. right? It's important to give you space to not feel judged and to be able to experiment. There are governments right now that want to force everybody to, KYC, have your public, have your identity known. They want to look at your communications. That is kind of under threat. On the other side, we do need transparency. In order to have accountability, especially for our, public systems, you have a right to, know public information about people so you can make, and businesses, so you can make informed decisions. And so there is kind of a trade-off between privacy and transparency. And we have just like a few claims here that are kind of examples of claims that people might make. You might agree or disagree with any one of the claims. But with Geo, we can add arguments for and arguments against any of these claims, and soon people will be able to come in and upvote and downvote and rank. And so in this way, we can like organize really any information, but here starting with claims about this specific topic. I think we're not used to organizing our arguments and our claims kind of in this way. But I think it's really important as technology moves faster, for us to be able to like think critically about the decisions that we make and the ways that we organize ourselves. You have to wonder whether it's the AIs that are getting smarter or whether it's we that are getting dumber. But if we could learn to reason and argue and elevate the quality of the debates and the conversations that we had, I think we'd be really well off. Another example is democracy versus meritocracy. So in the U.S., you could look at our elections and the way that governance happens and wonder whether this is like the best way to organize ourselves. I think there are a lot of interesting merits to meritocracy, where you give more power to people who have a demonstrated ability in a certain area. If you had to show that you knew a basic thing about something that you were voting on, would that produce better outcomes? Maybe. On the other hand, there are risks with that. You could have a group of people that gain power that make decisions that aren't in the best interest of like everybody else. So interesting philosophical questions to look at. What are the pros and cons of democracy and meritocracy, and we can organize that debate in Geo. One more concept could look at like pluralism, which is the concept of having multiple different points of view or versions of something that can coexist in the same system. So like with Wikipedia, you have like one canonical page for every concept. Right? And if you disagree with the majority, like that sucks. Your position doesn't exist. It could be good to have pluralism, to allow for divergent points of view. But if you do that, you also risk having like fragmentation. And so there are trade-offs. So let's kind of organize those trade-offs and try to understand, as we're building these like new information systems, how to allow for pluralism, but in a way that doesn't fragment society. So there's lots of interesting questions like this, and if you're interested, you can dive in, and we're going to be diving a lot deeper on a lot of these like philosophical topics. Another example of data that you can organize in Geo is health. I don't know about you, but I get so many wildly conflicting pieces of advice around health, nutrition, exercise, everything, and it's really hard to know how to make sense of that. People will cite studies. Was a study done correctly? Like, I don't know. I don't have time to do all of that research. But if you had an entity for, every paper and research study and source, and the experts could go through and upvote, downvote, give reasons why this study was flawed or whatever, and then you have a canonical version of all of these things and the individual facts, I might actually help you be able to like understand things around your health better. So for example, we can dive into yoga and learn a bunch of things related to yoga. So let's see. I mean, these are just claims. They may or may not be true. But here's a claim that when compared to the control group, those who practice yoga showed significant decreases in stress and anxiety. So that's cool, but maybe I'm coming in here and I'm like, this thing is saying that it's related to yoga, but it's also really relevant to like anxiety and stress. So let's update this entity. So I can just switch into edit mode here, and I add another topic. I can say that this is also related to anxiety. And up here there's a content area. And maybe I want to leave some content. This seems like something that more people should do. And I can review that. So I can see a diff. These are the changes that I'm making. I added the anxiety topic. So add anxiety to yoga claim. And now I can actually make changes to as many entities and pages as I want all at the same time. So I could change like 1,000 things, go in, update a bunch of topics, and then publish it with a single transaction on chain. So I can hit publish there, and I'm going to use my phone to sign. And right here it's adding the changes to the graph. And this is using Polygon, and so it happened pretty fast, and that cost me just about 2 cents, if you guys care about my 2 cents. We can look at the crypto space. So, lots of people are working in the crypto space, and people have been building, really great projects, protocols, DAOs, applications, dApps. And so we can see them all here by category. I'm going to refresh to go back into browse mode. For example, maybe I want to search. And actually, I can just pull up this global search, and I can actually search the entire graph just from here. And so maybe I want to see like the music category. And I can see, all of the projects that are, in the music category in the crypto space. I can see, for example, here there's a bunch of roles. And so we have, these are all different, like, job roles that people could do that are relevant to the crypto space and associated skills. And you can imagine that with these skills, maybe you want to actually link to like educational content and tutorials, and here's how you get certified. Or so we can organize all of this stuff so that if someone wants to work in the crypto space, they can find out ways to get involved. So maybe I want to look at, for example, Solidity Engineer, and here I can see at the bottom of every entity you also have like the backlinks. So these are all of the entities that are referencing this one. And so in this case, there's a specific job opening to be a Solidity engineer at EdgeNode. I can click on it, and I can see the job posting. And at the bottom here, these are all of the different facts about this entity. And I can see like the company is EdgeNode, so I can click to that. So you can just, traverse all of these, different entities, across the entire graph really seamlessly. And, all of the information here has been like curated and organized by like this whole space. And so, you're no longer trusting an individual, you're no longer trusting a company, you're trusting a community that is curating all of this information. And, you can see the history of any change. And so, so if you want to know, like, why did this thing become the way it is? How did it get into this state? You can see the history of any page, of any entity, and of an entire space. And so, people in crypto like to talk about mainstream adoption, and when is that coming? But I would invite anyone who's working in crypto, that we should start using these tools ourselves. Let's like organize everything in the crypto economy natively on Web3, right? Not using like these old web tools. Let's make sure that we have every single project on here and what they're working on, and the people that are working at these companies, and events that are coming up, and job openings. And if we can organize all of that stuff natively in Web3, then we can actually show how effective these tools are for coordinating within an industry. And let's do it first ourselves. If we want to look at the people space, this is a place where we have public profiles for everybody in Geo. And in the future, there's going to be like interesting ways that we can aggregate data across different spaces, to show kind of a public profile. And this is basically a place where you want to showcase the work that you've done. What's your work experience, your skills, maybe your portfolio. And based on this, you can build up like a reputation that people within your space and in other spaces can use. There are reputation systems that kind of exist implicitly on the web today. Like on Twitter, you have a number of followers, for example. Maybe that's a type of reputation. But I don't know what having a lot of Twitter followers really buys you, except maybe some mean tweets. Wikipedia uses reputation-weighted voting. And so they use reputation, and it seems to work for them. But just because you're an expert on like mammals on Wikipedia, it doesn't mean that people look to you or that you have any more weight when it comes to wildlife policy or something like that, right? And so having portable reputation, natively on Web3 is going to allow us to build much better meritocratic systems where we can really look at like what have people done and weight that to give people more power, to decentralize power. We can really organize any kind of information for any interest area, area of study, industry. But the vision for Web3, it's very expansive. But how should we prioritize what we tackle? And I do think that we should organize all of those things and create spaces in all of these areas. But one way that I like to look at things is how can we have the most impact? Right? And if you want to approach it from that angle, the way that we have the most impact as an industry is it means that we want to go solve like big challenges, things that are like real problems that are hurting people, and let's try to solve those. And if we want to do that, a really effective strategy can be to try to start local, because the world's a really big place, and so let's try to make change at home before we try to get other people to do the same. And so we're here in San Francisco, and San Francisco is a beautiful city with so much rich culture and its creativity. Like so much has come from this place, right? The gay rights movement, the hippie anti-war movement, technology, the personal computer. Burning Man was started right here at Baker Beach. And so we have a history of creating these kinds of movements, but we also have a lot of problems. People all around the world love to look at and talk about the problems that we have here in San Francisco. So why don't we do something about it? So if we wanted to try to solve San Francisco's biggest challenges, it would help to start with a list of, well, what are the challenges? What are the problems? Or another way of framing it could also be, on the more positive side, looking at the goals. And, some goals that we might look at are, things like clean streets, public safety, abundant housing, and ending homelessness, quality education, urban development, revitalizing downtown, reliable transportation, environmental sustainability. If we did these things and we did them well, San Francisco would be an incredible place to live. So if we look at these types of challenges, I mean, they're challenges for a reason, right? Like, they're hard. And I think you can really look at it in, two parts. The first is public policy. These are all things where, the laws make a big difference. So how do we come up with the right public policy in each of these areas? Well, to start, you need to get people to get to consensus on what the goals are. If people are trying to do different things and they're all at odds with each other, they can't even agree on the goals, and there's no way that we can solve any of these problems. Once you have your public policy, then you can look at, how do we deploy our resources to effectively achieve those goals. So let's start with policy. And we can look at, for example, housing policy, which has a big impact on things like abundant housing as well as homelessness. And so here's a list of goals. They're by no means exhaustive, and a lot of people might disagree with these. But some goals might be, increasing tax revenue, make it easier, excuse me, to build housing, increase average tenure of residence, increase real estate utilization rate, lower rents by increasing rental property supply, provide subsidized housing based on merit or disability, reduce the market price of housing by increasing supply, and maintain the character and charm of our unique neighborhoods. Now, there are a lot of people that actually disagree with these goals, right? There are plenty of people that think that free markets and market price housing is bad and is evil, and that all housing should be priced and given out by the government. There are a lot of people that don't want to build. They don't want the price of housing to come down. And so how do we agree? Let's talk about it. Let's organize, the claims, the arguments for and against each of these parts, and let's, bring people together to participate in this process. So we have regular meetings here at House of Web3 called We Heart SF, where we talk about a lot of these kinds of issues. We came up with this list of policy goals in one of those meetings. And so if you're interested in participating in these sorts of policy discussions and getting involved, you can join us here for the We Heart SF meetups. And if we look at an issue like homelessness, part of it is housing, and a big problem that we have here in San Francisco is related to substance abuse. So if we want to look at, for example, drug policy, it's a thorny topic. So here's an example list of goals. By no means extensive. You may not believe in them, but some goals could be eliminate open-air drug markets, reduce deaths from drug overdose, eliminate hard drug use in public, provide quality recovery services to anyone who wants it, and respect the choice of individuals who use soft drugs in a way that doesn't negatively affect others. So it's an example. People might agree, disagree with any one of these, but we have a platform now, a place where we can have these discussions. You can, link to your studies. We can, talk about the quality of those studies. People can vote, participate, upvote, downvote, and we can start to understand a little bit better and maybe get to consensus on what the right policies are as a city. There's a lot of things that go into something like ending homelessness. And, for me, I think that if there was one thing that we accomplished in the next few years, I would love it if it was this. I mean, how different of a city would San Francisco be if we ended homelessness? And I think we can do it. There's no reason why a rich country like ours can't do this. Right? And so we need to start by coming up with the right policies. And then if we can agree on what the goals are that can get us here, then we need to be able to effectively marshal resources to achieve those goals. And we're not lacking resources in the San Francisco Bay Area. San Francisco spent $1.4 billion last year on nonprofits. And there's very little accountability and results for where that money goes. And so this is where Web3 can come in. Because Web3 is meant for open, transparent coordination. And in Web3 we have something that are called DAOs. And DAOs are decentralized organizations. You can think of them as like companies or some kind of entity that has a public bank account, right, on the blockchain, and you can have different governance structures over these things, and it's all transparent and enforced by the blockchain. And so one way to think about this would be like we had car transportation services, the cabs. And when you have this like central dispatch, things tend to be pretty slow, pretty expensive, not that convenient. But then Uber came around and it created a much more decentralized marketplace of the drivers and connecting them to riders. And when you decentralize that, when you give people freedom where people can clock in and decide to work when they want, and get matched with people who need their services, the quality of the service can just go through the roof, right? And so, DAOs can enable those kinds of like open, permissionless markets, but with transparency where you can see like where's all the money going. And so we want to help spawn DAOs to do a bunch of things that can help us end homelessness. So, for example, build and staff transitional housing. People that like want to get help, that want to get off the streets, a lot of times they just need help to kind of get off their feet. And so building small, for example, like tiny homes where people can have dignity and they're not being like shoved into these like large spaces with a bunch of other people, and then providing services to them can be a really helpful way to help get people off the street and get back on their feet. If you're going to be here in San Francisco next week and you're interested in this topic, Dan and Anne Marie are going to be giving a talk here at House of Web3 on the work that they're doing, building small tiny homes to help with homelessness in the Bay Area. Things like workforce development. Can we onboard a bunch of people who can organize the different job opportunities and training to get people the skills they need to find fulfilling work. Things like recovery, right? For people that want to get clean, it's not always easy. To get shelter beds in San Francisco, often you have to wait weeks before you can get like a detox bed, or to bring on substance abuse counselors that can provide like therapy sessions, either individually or in group settings. So a DAO focus on recovery for people who want it, can make a really huge difference. And finally here, mentorship. I don't know what's going on with the images, but a lot of times, people just need someone who takes an interest in their lives. It's really hard to get back on your feet when like nobody even knows or cares what you're doing. And so, could we create a network of people who volunteered or even get paid to just spend 30 minutes, an hour, a week, just checking in and talking to someone and being a mentor for them. How big of a change could that make in somebody's life? And how many people would be willing to do that if they had something easy like that they could do to clock in and to help? And so, with these types of tools, I think that that we could make progress on a goal like ending homelessness in San Francisco. And I really believe in the power of Web3, and I think that when we get this engine up and running, that we can see transformative change a lot faster than anybody would currently expect or hope. That is a look at Geo and the work that we're doing here, and it's just the beginning. It's just a starting point. If you want to get involved, we are opening up signups for early access, editor access to Geo. We've started a Geo Explorers program actually a month ago, and so we've had our first 10 editors coming in and adding projects to the crypto space and organizing information for the crypto space. But we're ready to start onboarding editors in any kind of area that you're interested in. Whatever your interest groups are, areas of study, your industry. We can start to organize information related to that in a verifiable way on Geo. If you're interested in the philosophy topics and you want to participate in these discussions where we're thinking through the ethics and these deeper questions around the society that we want to build collectively on Web3, you can scan this QR code and sign up to join the Future Thinkers Collective. We meet online, and so you can join from anywhere. And if you want to get involved with these issues here in the Bay Area, you want to help solve San Francisco's biggest challenges, we meet here at House of Web3 regularly, and we're building a vibrant community here of people who want to make a change. So we opened up House of Web3 for people to work out of at the beginning of the year, and we've been building this really vibrant community of entrepreneurs, activists, people who want to help build this next generation of decentralized infrastructure and products and DAOs and coordination mechanisms. But we're starting here in San Francisco, but it doesn't have to end here, right? Web3 is a global movement, and so I think we're going to be trialing a lot of these tools and learning a lot about what this sort of decentralized coordination can do, and then we want to help bring this all throughout the world. Web3 really is a global movement, and as we we build these tools out and we prove it out, if we can solve a challenge, if we can solve a challenge like ending homelessness in just one city like San Francisco, then I think that that'll be like a beacon. That'll be like proof to people that you can really solve any challenge in any city with these kinds of tools. And so I'm excited to get to work and bring all of this to life. So just remember, as we're building out this future, this decentralized knowledge graph and these new coordination systems, that love is better than hate, truth is better than ignorance, and decentralization will set us free. Thank you.
That was inspiring. Thank you, Yaniv. We're going to take questions now from anyone in the audience. Yeah, I'll start with you.
Yaniv, that was great. I'm kind of curious, how do you separate a fact graph from an opinion graph?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we want all of that here, and that kind of goes a little bit to like the pluralism, concept, because I think that in an ideal world, you can include things that are wrong, and so they can exist, and then people can upvote and downvote them. And so, maybe if a lot of people downvote it and it's like not currently accepted, but you can still see it, and maybe people can say like why they don't accept it. I think it's good that it exists and that you can find it, but it doesn't mean that it needs to be like accepted as truth.
And I'm guessing, I didn't see like votes in the interface. I'm guessing you guys are adding that interface to it.
Yeah, so I didn't touch on that. So right now, so when I published the change, it just went like directly onto the graph. Yeah. We are going to be rolling out governance. And the spaces will be able to define their own kind of governance rules. One of the things that we're talking about, for example, at the Future Thinkers Collective is like what the default governance should look like, but eventually we want people to like bring their own kind of governance and to be able to customize it. And then, yeah, we don't have the upvotes, downvotes ranking yet. That's going to be coming soon.
And I'd imagine like governance equals kind of curation of these things as well, right?
That's right, exactly. So the governance is voting on whether to accept the changes, but you could have rules around like, maybe you have certain roles that can like upvote, downvote, but they can't like, they're not actually voting on the changes. So there's different ways that you could like design the governance system. But ultimately, what you're doing is you're organizing the knowledge graph.
Cool.
Yeah, and then there was another part to your question, yeah, which is around just like subjectivity.
Yes.
And so we touched on that on our meetup on pluralism. So there are certain things that are more objective in nature and certain things that are more subjective in nature. And so the subjective things may never be right or wrong, but you still can allow for lots of people to post those things. And I do think that's something that, for example, Wikipedia doesn't work on subjective information because they don't have pluralism and they can only do things that are objective.
And I want to bring up like the Oracle problem with you on that, right? Which is like, well, yesterday it was 73 degrees or whatever it is. Just because 100 people vote that it was 65 doesn't mean it's true, right? So do you see that in certain cases you bring in an Oracle? Like these are problems we face on the blockchain as well, right? With consensus.
Yeah. So I also didn't touch on this. So right now we're kind of starting with just like this knowledge graph thing, but also we're going to be able to bring in like all of the information that is on any subgraph that people are currently building. And so there are subgraphs for almost every like protocol or like smart contract on your popular chains. And so all of that data can just like feed into Geo, or we'll soon be able to just feed into Geo. So you can have live dynamic, things that are pulling from oracles or something like that, and you can just like say, we want to pop this up on this page, and so you can feed all of that through.
Cool.
Thanks. Just to piggyback on what he had mentioned, is there a mechanism for the curation and the voting that's like a token curated registry? Like, is there some backbone that you're saying this is how we're going to, make sure there's not a Sybil attack or some fraud or anything? What's the going behind the scenes, or is that up to each space to determine, and that just falls under governance and it's a free for all for everything?
Yeah, good question. For people that weren't in crypto in like 2018, TCRs or token curated registries were like a hot kind of topic, and I think like they understood the problem correctly, the problem to solve, which is how do you allow a decentralized group of people to organize a list of anything, right? To curate a list, and that is a fundamental thing that is important to solve. I think that there were several flaws with the original TCR mechanisms. I think one, they relied too much on economic incentives. And I actually think that for like most things where you're trying to organize information, there are plenty of people that have like an inherent incentive in like having this thing curated. And so I think it's actually much less around incentivizing people to curate as it is to give people who want to curate it the tools to do it effectively. And so that's where I think that like custom governance and, maybe whether it's reputation-weighted voting or like different ways of like building these governance systems can like give people the tools to like assume that there's a big group of people that like want to get the right answer or want to participate or like, that they have the ability to do that. And then I think you can layer on incentives kind of separately. And for example, the graph has like a curation incentive mechanism, and there's different ways that you could kind of, I think, divert fees to different people that are participating. But yeah.
And then just a quick follow on. You had mentioned that this space would be able to pull from any subgraph, but how do people know what the taxonomy is so that the right project gets pulled on? Somebody out somewhere else in San Francisco, not as familiar with this, wants to put something on here where they have some ideas on homelessness. How does this know that it's really talking about homelessness versus someone's writing and has the word homelessness, but he's really talking about his band named Homelessness?
Yeah.
So what's the way that things get pulled in a meaningful taxonomy?
Yeah, well, I think, doing search well once we're kind of at like web scale is going to be an interesting problem. And it's very context dependent on where you're at. So I think you'd want to do things like weight your current space that you're in higher, or you can weight spaces that are higher, closer to the root higher. And so I think that the fact that we're organizing the spaces themselves can kind of help to like place you in a context where you can easily find what you're looking for in that context.
So I noticed in the demo that some of the spaces had claims, some had goals. I think that may have been answered in a prior answer. Is that would be set up, I guess, in the governance model of the space. So those were just like example spaces that you've set up with different kind of hierarchies and...
Yeah. So basically, so entities can have types, and the types, that's like a goal, or a claim is like a type, and you can define types in any space. So if I'm in the San Francisco space and I want to track something like parks, right? I just create a new entity. It's a park. And then the type of a park is a type, right? So I'm going to like define a type called park, and then I can specify like attributes so that if someone says like I want to create a park, maybe you want like the address and like whether it's kid friendly, or you can have whatever attributes are relevant to parks. So you can add that here, and now I've defined a new type, and then people can start creating parks, and it'll show up as being like well, if they create the entity in the San Francisco space and they see that that's in the San Francisco space, and then you can create these the content. So I didn't really talk about that. So you have these pages for every entity, and the pages basically you can it's like a block-based editor model. So you can have paragraphs, you can have images, you can have tables, different like component types. And so you can like create a table, where you could just search for, I want all of the parks, and then maybe you want to like filter on like this neighborhood, and then you can just like display it on the table on whatever page you want.
Hi, so I was wondering about the participation in this platform and how that relates to solving like issues that are complex, such as homelessness in San Francisco. So you were saying that ideally you have mechanisms and tools for participation, incentives for people to do that. But in the end, there tends to be a certain community that will have more knowledge that this Web3 platform exists, and that's quite a niche community as of now. I imagine that none of the people here today have are unhoused in San Francisco, for example, or have experience with that. intimate experience with that. So how do you imagine trying to get a much broader range of people aware that this is out there and this is a way that people are organizing information, so that there's not this like illusion of objectivity when there's actually quite a small and skewed proportion of the population that's on it and contributing?
Yeah, for sure. I think that this is like a very specific type of like segment of the population. I'm sure that's like in this room. So we do try to, first of all, like bring people in who, for example, we had an event here with 2 people that were formerly homeless, and they could speak to their direct like lived experience, and I think that's helpful just to give people like a perspective they might not get every day. And we are trying to, in general, like bring more people here to like House of Web3 that are like outside of tech and are like working in these areas already and have a lot of experience in those areas. So that's definitely something that we're trying to do. And then I think that maybe we could have a DAO of people who are doing essentially like street outreach and like telling people about Web3, and like going to like different places. And I think there's lots of ways that we can work on like the marketing aspect to reach different audiences. I think starting out as we've been like building up the tech, it's been mostly like the people who are kind of like building it, working on it. But I think you're right that like the next big stage from here is going to be like bringing this out into the world and helping to like educate people who otherwise wouldn't be interacting with this stuff.
Hi, great talk, and I think what you're building is going to be super important, especially as like some of these knowledge tools start to lose like people's trust, and like mainstream trust of news sources is like eroding. I guess, could you speak more about sort of the censorship resistance of sort of the protocol and how you guys like handle that and make sure that like pretty much any topic can be sort of discussed, and how it would work in places where maybe it's sensitive information? Like, can anybody fork and make their own like IPFS front end, stuff like that?
Yeah, so Geo runs entirely on open public infrastructure, right? It's fully decentralized. So the stack right now, and it could be deployed in different environments, but it's we use IPFS for the data, anchored on Polygon, and then indexed on the graph. And so when you create a space that's deploying a contract, in the future we want to make it so you can deploy those contracts on like whatever chain you want, and then generates like a subgraph, and that subgraph be deployed to the graph network, and that's like a permissionless, censorship resistant network that the indexers on the graph get to choose which subgraphs they want to index. So if your space is like dealing with something that like nobody wants to touch, like you can't force the indexers to do that. But as long as there's like one indexer somewhere in the world who's like, this is a topic I believe in, even if it's unpopular, that indexer can pick it up, and Geo can render it.
Yeah, I'm curious about what your vision is for interacting with different spaces as a user. So like I'm a college student. If I wanted to go write a paper on urban development, would I be interacting with one space or searching across like multiple spaces? Should I think of these more as like websites or groups of websites? Like what's the metaphor here?
Yeah, I mean it's a new type of thing. So starting at a high level and just drilling down as deep as you want to go. So right now we don't have like subspaces and that kind of like hierarchical structure yet. We're going to be working on that soon. But you could imagine that you could have like a science space, and under that you could have a physics space, and under that you could have a quantum mechanics space, and under that you can have only people who believe in the many worlds version of quantum mechanics. And so you can just nest, as long as there's a community that says like, hey, this is an area of specialization, or we have our own set of values and we don't agree with those other people, and you can create your own space, and then that community can kind of be in harmony, organizing the data for that space and the content, and then And then we can work on like aggregating it back up as you move kind of back up towards the root.
You know, when I first thought geo browser, I thought a literal web browser that includes this knowledge graph, and I wonder if that's a way to kind of plug in. Like that would be a really interesting integration.
Yeah, so I didn't exactly speak to that. I kind of spoke to it. So I said that the Geo is a Web3 browser and a decentralized knowledge graph app. And what I'm presenting today is the knowledge graph app. There is still the Web3 browser, and that's for another day.
So I have a question. Can everybody go and interact with it?
Yeah, so right now, anybody can go to geobrowser.io and browse, all of the content on Geo. You can share it, you can post links on Twitter, all of that. And then for the time being, we're manually adding editors to the different spaces. So if you want to create a space, fill out that form, and we can set you up with a space. And at the beginning, it's going to be a little bit more curated. We're going to kind of grow organically, and then at some point, we'll open up the like permissionless spaces.
Anyone else have some questions?
Not like this. There's lots of different ways to try to organize information.
My question is about participating and potentially over here in the back. Hi. From a normative sense, I guess it's sort of the lunar punk question. How do you have smaller groups or allow for something less than pluralism? How do you allow for privacy? And from a juridical sense, how do you allow for and bake in CCPA and GDPR and allow for ownership or control of use of potentially personal data and or, you can't just downvote your data being used. You have absolute juridical rights to control said use of data. So anyway.
Yeah, so right now, Geo is really focused on just public data. There are the interesting questions, for example, of like, what kind of public data might there be about somebody? I think in Europe they have like the right to be forgotten. But if I kill somebody, can I then someone puts that there's a news article about that, and then I'm like, hey, I've got the right to be forgotten. Take down the article. So we've had a Future Thinkers Collective talk meet up on that topic, which is an interesting one. But right now it's just public information, things that are of public interest, right? So now the way that Web3 I think handles private information, because obviously people have lots of things that they want to do that's just private. It's obviously an important part of Web3. It's not the part that we're kind of like focused on, but essentially the Web3 answer is, encrypt it locally on your device. Don't send it unencrypted to anybody else's servers, and that's the best way to make sure that you retain control over your private information.
Could you walk through just a really quick use case? Let's take something not controversial, say like planting trees on Valencia, something like that. If you wanted to get started, what would you do first? Do people volunteer, or is there kind of like funding where people get paid and the DAO contributes, that kind of thing? Like you just walk through a kind of basic use case?
Yeah, so let's say that there was basically like a space whose sole goal was to plant trees, right? Now, I don't know the specific, ordinances or, laws in San Francisco around that. Presumably, you do need permission. I will say I think that that's where a lot of things break down is you need to interface with government and things that are regulated, and every single thing is slow and expensive and doesn't happen. And that's a big part of why we have these problems. So, if we had open public infrastructure, right, that actually was able to aggregate the will of the people, then like eventually like maybe this is how those laws and ordinances would be written, and you would just have a system that moves a lot faster, and you could like, you know, put in the permit request and have it like filled in like a few hours instead of like in a few months or never. And I mean, that would be amazing. And so assuming that you had the permits, and I don't know what, then you know, eventually we do want to, you know, have this integrated with DAOs, and yeah, people could like, you know, put money into it, and then people could submit proposals where, you know, they want to, you know, go plant on this street. Here's how much it's going to cost. You know, a few people maybe upvote it. You know, it goes through, and then they can go and, you know, they have the funds to go do the project. Maybe afterwards they like snap some photos to show that they actually did it. You could have like, you know, a verification protocol even where people can check to make sure that the things were actually planted, or like dispute it if they go there and they're like, hey, I didn't see any trees there. And so you design these sorts of mechanisms, but then it becomes something where, you know, anybody who has an idea who wants to like do something, you know, it should be a lot easier for people to, you know, be able to get the resources to kind of like make their own decisions, you know, get things green lighted, and if we empowered a lot more people, we'd probably get a lot, you know, more great things done.
Hey, Yaniv, great talk. So I have a question about open financial data. So many of the subgraphs that you see today on the graph protocol, for lending protocols in particular, they index chain link price feeds every block. And so they have all this wealth of financial data. You can go back in time, you can time travel query. And I'm wondering, it seems like that's a really powerful use case, is maybe making like an open source version of Bloomberg, but also for not just crypto, but for traditional finance and markets. And I guess I'm kind of curious about, do you see that as a compelling use case for this? You know, if we put all that financial data in real time into a subgraph, now we can, you know, create these nice real Web3 visualizations of it and give people access to that in real time. And I guess the follow-up to that is, how would you prevent, you know, private or closed versions of like Bloomberg basically mirroring all this content and then trying to paywall it and sell it?
Yeah, well, you know, I think, you know, Mosari is a project in the crypto space that's, you know, maybe in some ways like a Bloomberg for crypto. And I think that they're doing incredible work. They have a super talented team of analysts and engineers, and they've chosen to build on the graph. And so I think that's really great because, you know, I think they believe in the Web3 ethos. And so, you know, all of those subgraphs are open source. And so, you know, as long as you have people that are building in the space that like, you know, actually believe in decentralization, you know, I think, you know, we keep this stuff open. So yeah, I think that's a great use case.
Yeah, how are you thinking about achieving a certain density of knowledge in an area? Because these different spaces you gave as examples are pretty different. And so just from a business standpoint, I'm thinking like it makes sense to focus on one, like health, for example, or San Francisco, or maybe to focus on information that changes less frequently. So yeah, is there a focus that you're starting off with?
Yeah, I agree. So, you know, I think the ones that like we want to go deep on to start are like philosophy, health, and San Francisco, and specifically ending homelessness in San Francisco. So that's the way that like my team is going to be like focusing. But we don't want to stop people who are interested in different things from also being able to use it. So I think that's part of like why we also have the forum, is we're going to see as people register, they'll be able to say like what spaces they're interested in. And maybe if we have like enough people that are interested in a certain space, and we'll help them get started with it. But that's how we're going to be focusing it. If there's enough people that are interested in like anything, you know, happy to give them the tools so they can do it. Cool. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming.